What is going on today, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Fix It Garage. We are back on the FA20 engine block replacement. If you guys don't remember, this is a buddy of mine's car which has some pretty bad rod knock. And because of this, we were replacing the engine block. In the last two videos, we went ahead and we've been working on pulling the engine. We got the top end completely torn down, and that was kind of where we ran out of time. Today, the goal is to get the rest of the engine torn completely apart and have a bare block on this engine stand. That is the goal for the end of this video, is to have everything torn apart. In order to get down to a bare block, we need to get the turbo and all the bottom end stuff torn apart. So we're gonna need to rotate this engine to get better access and then start tearing all of that stuff off. That will then allow us to go ahead and start removing the timing cover and the valve cover so we can get these heads off and get it down to a bare block. So that's enough of me talking. Let's get started on this thing. In order to work on the bottom side of this, we're gonna need to rotate it, which means we're gonna make a big mess. So let's go ahead and rotate this thing and just get it over with. Alrighty. Please don't make a big. Oh, yep, you're gonna you're gonna do that right on the floor. Just right on my floor. That was great. Let's try and catch some of it at least. Oh, there's quite a bit of coolant in there. You done yet? Are you gonna behave now? Oh, nope, you're not quite ready yet. Okay. Well, it's okay, because I am. Engine's rotated. Let's go ahead and take a look at this and kind of get a game plan together on what we need to do. So here we have the bottom side of the engine. We've got our exhaust manifold, we've got our catalytic converter, and most importantly, we have the turbo and the sump for the turbo. So it looks like the first place we really need to start is probably removing this cover and then maybe removing some of these to get access to the bolts for the catalytic converter, because that is definitely in the way. And I feel like if we get that off, we'll have more room. Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's try and get this catalytic converter off. Catalytic converter is removed. You have 4 bolts and a bracket bolt here. This was not easy to remove. This was kind of a pain to get off just due to the space. This bolt is very hard to get to. I had to take a wrench through here to break it loose and then long extensions to get it down from the top. But we did get it off and it's sitting over there. So now what we need to do is get this plate off, and we need to start kind of figuring out what needs to come off in order to get this turbo and exhaust manifolds off. Okay, so that showed us one thing. It showed that we can't remove this without this. They have to come off as one piece. So we have our 6 exhaust bolts, which we will do later. Right now, we're gonna focus on all the lines that are on the front of the turbo. Look at that, 1 turbo and exhaust manifold removed. Let's get this out of the way and we'll look at it here in a minute. All right, with the exhaust manifolds now off and the turbo off, we have full access to our oil pan, which we'll get to in a minute, but we can also see here, this thing had an exhaust leak from the exhaust manifold. That is from this bolt and this bolt not being tight. It's super weird to see 2 bolts not tight on this car like that for the exhaust. That creates a massive leak, which just causes all kinds of issues. So I'm very surprised to see that. At least we found that, so that's something we'll fix when we put it back together, because we'll make sure that those are nice torqued and tight so we don't have an exhaust leak. But now with this off, we have a much clearer view. We can pull off our water pump, our thermostat housing, these coolant lines up here, the coolant and oil lines down here. We can get all this stuff off and out of the way. Then all that will be left will be the oil pan and the timing covers. Oh, and we'll pull off these motor mounts too, but we're almost got this thing ready to pull the heads off. On the turbo, I like to check the shaft play. Ha 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 ha. So what I'll do is not only will I spin the turbo, make sure it spins, but I'll try pulling it forwards and back, which it's not moving, and then lift it up and down, which it is also not doing. So this has no excessive shaft play. This turbo is still good, and it better be, because it's a Garrett. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but yeah, it's a Garrett turbo. I didn't know these newer WRXs ran Garretts, and it's a pretty good sized Garrett. Like, that's not a tiny turbo. It's not a big turbo, but it's not tiny. So that's pretty cool to see. So now that we have the turbo off, let's go ahead and get back working on the motor. Let's get the last of these bits off so we can pull the rest of the engine apart. Alrighty everyone, so it's actually the next day. Let me show you guys real quick what we got done on the engine. So as you guys saw in that last clip, we got all the rest of the stuff off the back of the engine, hoses, metal bracket lines from over here. We removed all of our hoses from underneath here and over here. So there's no more hoses left on this engine other than this one, which will come off with the timing cover. And this one, which I think will come off, which will transfer onto the new block once we have the new block mounted. All that's left now is our oil pan, timing cover, and then the cylinder heads. All right, so now all that we have left is just a few more pieces and we'll have that engine stripped apart. So what we're going to do next is we're gonna work on getting off that crank pulley. It would not come off with my impact gun, so we're going to use another method to go ahead and get that pulley off. Now, while it's not my favorite method, one trick is we're gonna use a really big breaker bar on the pulley bolt, and then we're gonna stick some bolts back in the flywheel and put a pry bar in there and hold it in place while we break that loose. I brought home a very big pry bar just to do this job tonight. So we're gonna go ahead and get that all set up and try to get this pulley off. All right, we got that crank pulley off. As you saw, it took two people. One person on the back with a pry bar against those two bolts holding it in place, and then me with a big breaker bar and a cheater on top of that. Any real mechanic knows don't use cheaters. Bad. That's how you break tools and hurt yourself, but I'm a half professional, it's okay. Something interesting about this, when you get it off, you can look in here and you'll see these flat spots. That is the oil pump, which is driven off of the flat spots on the crank. So that's how you get your oil pump drive to build oil pressure. And then back in there is our crank shaft, and then there's a keyway hiding in there as well that is for indexing your crank so the crankshaft is timed correctly. All right, so now that that's off, we're gonna go ahead and work on getting off our timing cover, and then we can start getting these cylinder heads off. All right, timing chain cover is now off, so we can see our 2 different chains. Pretty interesting to see that these guides are held in with only the tensioner and a slide on. There's no bolts holding it in. But right now we're gonna go ahead and get these chains off. Normally, if you're not replacing the cylinder, or if you're not taking the heads off, you wanna time it and then remove them. But because we're taking everything off, we can go ahead and just take them off as they are, and we'll time it when it all goes back together. All right, so we have everything off and out of the way. I took off a couple extra pieces. You can actually take off that whole cradle without taking the cams out. So I'll reassemble that on the bench and I'll show you guys that later. But right now we just want to get this head off so we can start looking inside the engine. There is 6 bolts that hold this head on. Let's go ahead and get these guys off and pull the head off and see what is going on inside of this motor. When you're loosening cylinder heads, always remember, go outside to in so you evenly release the pressure on your head gaskets and your block so you don't warp it.
You do want to do the other one. All right, you were right.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Hey, I got the pop loose.
Another piece of advice, when you're taking apart a cylinder head and you're loosening the bolts, get a nice big tool. Don't use a little ratchet and don't use an impact gun when you break them loose. Once you've broken them all loose, you can, but do not use it when you break them loose initially, unless you're planning on not reusing the entire engine. Now with the bolts loose, we can take them the rest of the way out with our impact gun. We're gonna make sure that they're all the same length. Actually, I guess it doesn't matter, we're not reusing them. Whenever you take them off normally, make sure that they're the same length, and if they're not, you need to mark where they came out from so you put them back in the correct hole. All right, now with that, we can, you just ruined my moment. We can lift the head off now. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, you've already done it. Just lift the head off. Just take
easier than you think. I thought there'd be gasket to break loose.
No, these use a MLS. All right, so just set that over there for right. So now we can pull off our old head gasket. We can see Subaru has really beefed up this ring here and all in here to strengthen their head gaskets. So good on them for making some huge improvements in their head gaskets. Unfortunately for them, this wasn't the issue with the car. The issue is with our connecting rod bearings, which we will show you once we get the pan off, but we're not quite there yet. right, we have this thing down to a block with just the oil pan. We're gonna go ahead and pull this off, and then we can show you guys exactly what's wrong with this engine. So let's go ahead and pop this pan off, and then we'll take a look inside the oil pan. That right there's part of the problem.
There's gold in that engine.
All right, so the pan's off, and we can't see anything. There's a girdle that goes around here that we're gonna go ahead and remove. I really hope the new engine has this on it, but if not, we'll deal with it. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and remove this girdle so we can look at the connecting rods. Alrighty, everybody, we've got the engine completely torn down to the block. We pulled off both of the cylinder heads, the girdle, and our oil pan. And in the oil pan right now, we saw our first bit of evidence. That shiny glitter, that is bearing material. That is from the copper layer of the rod bearings. You guys hear that? That is not good. That is a spun rod bearing. That is worn out and has eaten the bearing material, causing that debris glitter stuff in the oil pan. Usually a bearing fails due to loss of oil pressure on that cylinder, so that bearing gets really hot and you don't have that nice oil film between the connecting rod bearing and the crank. So they start to touch and you get that metal to metal contact, which has clearly happened, leading to that thing making noise. Now, why did it lose oil pressure? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not seeing anything obvious right now. Looking at the engine, there's no other signs of loss of oil pressure anywhere. There's no hot spots. So when you look at one of these engines, what you're looking at is you're looking at these you're looking at the crank counterweights for like super hot spots. So like right here, you can kind of see a little bit of a hot spot, and these look a little warm, but those bearings are fine. So the engine definitely had some heat down here from the lack of oil pressure, but it only managed to damage this one rod bearing. However, in this case, because it is a rod bearing, it's probably the best option that we're putting a new engine block in, and we will send all of this stuff, will get cleaned thoroughly before we put it all back together. We want to get all of this metal debris out of the engine, so when we reassemble it, there's no new metal that can destroy the new engine. So now that we have the whole engine torn apart, what's next? Well, reassembly. But right now, before we can put it back together, we need to send the flywheel, the cylinder heads, both off for machining. I need to take the timing cover, the cam stuff, and any other parts to work and clean them in our hot tank. So all of those parts are cleaned and ready for reassembly. I also hear you guys, I know you guys want less time lapse, and I'm trying to put less time lapse in, but the problem is it is so convenient. It allows me to just get work done without having to constantly worry about what the camera's doing. I can just get some work done, get things accomplished, and it doesn't take me forever to tear this apart. Plus, if I didn't time lapse it, this would be a 30-part series rebuilding the engine, and I'm not interested in doing a 30-part rebuild series. That being said, when we go back together, I will be sure to stop and explain a lot of things as we rebuild it, different things that we found, tips and tricks, all the things you guys are gonna need to know when reassembling one of these FA motors. As far as taking apart, it's pretty straightforward, but that is going to do it for today, everybody. If you like what you saw, as always, don't forget to smash the like button, leave some comments down below, and subscribe so you guys don't miss any future videos. You're not gonna want to, because we're gonna be putting this thing back together in the next video. That's right, in the next video, we're gonna put the new block on that stand and we're gonna start putting it all together, and you guys don't wanna miss that. Also, Check out my shorts for some sneak peeks on what is going on, or maybe some little extra behind the scenes clips or some tech tip videos that I've been making. You don't want to miss those. Pretty interesting stuff that I'm shooting. So be sure to check those out. But that's going to do it for today, everybody. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.